I'm Bob Murphy. Welcome to Maritime Noon. Coming up today on the phone-in, what are the impacts of smartphones and social media on young minds?
We are seeing worrisome downgrades in young people's ability to think critically or express longer opinions because Twitter, TikTok, they tend to encourage us to affirm our opinions, but not often explain, justify, or debate them in a logical way.
How are you handling smartphones in your household? Would you sign a pledge not to allow your child a smartphone until they're 16? That's coming up today on the Maritime Noon phone-in. And thanks for being with us. Last Friday, some students in Quebec went on strike. They were protesting the full ban of cell phones from bell to bell that will come into effect next fall. Now, in the Maritimes, students are not allowed access to their phones during class time. In some cases, though, older students are still allowed to use them between classes. But with increasing evidence of the negative impacts smartphones and social media have on children's mental health and social and cognitive development, some feel that doesn't go far enough. And so today on the phone-in, we will be hearing from two guests who both have deep concerns about smartphones and youth. But first, what do the kids think? The CBC's Rose Murphy spoke to Citadel High students in Halifax earlier this year about the cell phone ban in Nova Scotia classrooms, and here's some of what they had to say.
I'm Trenton Bradley. I'm in grade 12.
Isaac Blessing, grade 12.
So what do you think of the cell phone ban? How has it changed the way you use your phone and the way school goes?
It does not change me at all. I personally think it's not worth it. Because when I work, I listen to music because it helps me focus and stuff.
Do you find it's gotten harder to concentrate?
Definitely.
How about you?
I'd probably say I'm the opposite. I don't really need it, so it doesn't really change me. I see a lot more people getting in trouble though. So
for bringing their phones out?
Yeah, and stuff like that, having their headphones in and stuff.
I'm Morgan. I'm in grade 11.
My name is Aviva, and I'm in grade 11.
My name's Ava, and I'm in grade 11 as well.
So what do you guys think of the cell phone ban?
I hated it at first, but I have to admit, I'm doing better because of it.
How so?
I'm paying more attention, and I'm not on TikTok all the time.
Yeah, same. I've been more focused in class and everything, but I feel like we should be able to, have it when we're working, on our own to listen to music, because sometimes that helps, with distractions and everything, but for the most part, it's been better for me.
And do you feel less connected when you're not as up on what's happening on social media or less in contact with your friends?
We all signed in on our computers to social media and text, so we're kind of still doing all the stuff.
So has it really made much of a difference?
Well, personally, I'm not as distracted because, there's more things I can do on my phone. But, we're not disconnected because everyone's not on their phones and no one's doing anything on their phones, but it's made a difference, I feel like.
What do you find the most attractive or useful about social media?
Talking to friends.
And what platforms do you use?
Snapchat, Instagram.
Watching TikTok.
Doom scrolling on TikTok.
Yeah.
Do you have any issues with social media? Or do you have any concerns about how much time you spend on your phone? Is that something you ever worry about or think about?
Yeah. It's really bad. I will go upstairs to go to bed early, and then it's 12 o'clock, and I'm still scrolling on TikTok until my phone dies.
When I go home, my phone literally never turns off. I'm always on it. It's very bad.
Yeah, I'd probably say I'm about the same. Catching up for all the time that I missed at school, I guess.
Do you guys have a sense of, how many hours a day you're on your phone?
I spend a lot of time on, TV. It's not always on my phone. I'll be on my computer or TV or my iPad. I have, there's a lot of devices everywhere now. It's hard to stay away from them. So my screen time throughout all the platforms would probably be, most of the day. Or, even when I'm reading, I read a lot, but half the time, I'll get off reading and then I'll get on my phone and then I'll realize, why am I on my phone? I have nothing to do on my phone. And that's what I'll do.
Okay, what do you got?
Okay, so far today, I've spent 2.5 hours. My weekly report is on social media 64 hours and 34 minutes.
And does that seem normal or fine, or how do you feel about that?
That seems crazy.
about you?
I have like an average of 6 hours a day, which is like normally it'll be like 10 hours or like 13 hours, but I've been trying to get it down more to a normal level.
I mean, there's been a lot of talk about how it impacts people's mental health. Is that something you guys notice or are concerned about at all?
I feel like half the time I spend on TikTok, I feel like awful about anything, you know, because everyone's life on TikTok is like very specific, or like they pick what to show you, so you kind of don't feel great all the time.
If you guys could magically go back to a time when there was no social media, is that appealing?
Definitely, yes. Spend more time outside, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with him.
I feel like there were more like experiences that we don't all get to experience now because of social media.
Hang out for a minute.
I like the fact that you can communicate with people better, but like, yeah, it's like really like we're not present, you know? It's not helpful.
Thank you guys very much. Really appreciate your time. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too.
Take care.
Those are high school students in Halifax speaking to the CBC's Rose Murphy earlier this year. We're talking about the impacts of smartphones and social media on youth today on the Maritime Noon phone-in, and we want to hear from you. How are social media and smartphones affecting young people in your life? How do you deal with smartphones in your home? What do you think of efforts to regulate smartphone usage in schools? Give us a call. Share your thoughts at 1-800-565-1940, or you can send us an email at marnoon@cbc.ca. Now, those two guests I talked about. Kelly Lamrock is New Brunswick's child and youth advocate, and he's on the line from Fredericton. Welcome back to the show, Kelly.
Thanks, Bob. Good to be here.
And Jennifer Gill is with us as well. Jennifer leads the PEI chapter of Unplugged Canada. We'll get into that more as we go along here, but it's a parent-led advocacy group trying to educate parents about the risks of early smartphone and internet access, and she's joining us from our studio in Charlottetown. Welcome to you, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with those voices we just heard of the students in Halifax. I think there's a lot of nuggets there to chew on. But Jennifer, how typical are those comments that you heard among the young people you know?
I'd say fairly typical, and I was actually pretty impressed with their insight. They seem very aware that it is an issue, but they're trapped on it, I think, once they're on there, and that's how they communicate with their peers. They're constantly tied to it.
And we heard comments like, I'm trying to regulate my time. I'm trying to cut back on my hours. So there's an effort there, it sounds like.
Exactly. And I think even as adults, we all struggle with that too. I know I do myself. So it's just even more difficult for teenagers.
Yeah. 64 and a half hours stood out to me, though, as I heard one of the students talk about their weekly report on social media. 64 and a half hours. That's a lot.
That is a lot.
Is it typical? I mean, does that stand out to you as well, or?
So my husband and I have 4 children, and our oldest is 27, which is why we're kind of passionate about this, because we've already been through it. And back then, I don't think I was actually checking her screen time. I don't know if that's something we could do, but I don't know if it would be quite that high, but I honestly wouldn't have been too surprised.
Kelly, what did you take away from those voices you just heard?
It wasn't surprising for me, Bob. Either the depth of integration with their lives or the desire to stop, and as Jennifer said, the awareness that this could become a problem, that there are impacts on mental health. The reality is that in a lot of ways 20 years ago, we bought into the unlimited promise of technology and how it would be liberating. Instead, what largely has happened is we've increasingly centralized our lives on devices far more than we're probably built as human beings to centralize it. And so suddenly when all your social interactions, all of your music, all of your entertainment, all of your work stuff is in one small device you could carry around with you, knowing you want to reduce your time and figuring out a way to do that and not be left behind by the herd is incredibly challenging. And of course, we know that for some time now, very large global companies have made a lot of profit by designing it that way, and government hasn't really kept up with regulating the public good the way it would in other industries.
And you have some thoughts on how that could be sharpened up a little bit from the government's perspective, or what the government could do. But I know you did a lot of research, Kelly, in your role as New Brunswick's child and youth advocate. You've suggested, or you did last year, that schools be cell phone free zones. What were you seeing specifically in the research that you looked over about the seriousness and the ways that cell phones and social media affect young people's mental health?
Across professions, whether it's educators, doctors, mental health professionals like psychologists and psychiatrists who work with young people, there is almost universal concern that we've created a monster. There's no doubt, if you look at every Western democracy, the temporal correlation, the time when we see this spike in mental health cases in children presenting with anxiety, depression, goes up at almost the same pace as social media use. And we now know that correlation and causation are both there. We're seeing a few things. One, we're seeing often incredibly intense emotional experiences online from which there is no mental health break. We're not built, especially when we're teenagers, to do that. In fact, we now know that social media companies that don't have to publish the algorithms they use, but anyone who's been on YouTube will know pretty soon, it's like, their feed starts to steer me towards other things I might like to keep me watching. They tend to use more extreme content, more emotionally engaging. They tend to go to the emotions that tend to engage us a lot. Anger, outrage, peril, all of these things that can keep us high-pitched and watching. That has a tremendous impact. We're also seeing in ways we didn't anticipate. For instance, we are seeing a real decline in young people's problem-solving skills and perseverance in applying logic to solve complex problems. We've become very used to sort of taking out our cell phone and going, I don't have to try and recall using logic who must have, say, won the Stanley Cup final MVP in 1984. I could just Google it. So that seems small, but in a lot, when you add it all up, we're not reasoning our way through things anymore. We've become less able to communicate long-form ideas, to tolerate discussion and dissension. All of these are starting to happen.
And Jennifer, parents hear that and obviously feel some concern about the well-being of their children. But, Kelly also said, the fear of being left behind the herd there. So the implications or the risks involved in not giving people some access, because that's where their community is. That's how they communicate with each other. So if you take away cell phones or, say, social media apps specifically, then your child doesn't get to communicate with those kids that are still on it. So there's a real conundrum there, isn't there?
Yeah, it's very hard for parents, and they have to make a decision, and it's not really a fair one to make. So even the parents that I talk to that are very aware of the dangers, and they don't want to give their kids the access, they still, most of the time they do, because I think even though they're aware those harms are there, they're not going to see those impacts right away. But if they hold out and they don't give their child the smartphone, and they don't have the social media, and they're not connected with their friends, they do see that impact right away. And I think that's almost why we are seeing more and more parents cave, even the ones that are trying to hold out for a really long time, because nobody wants their child to be excluded. It's the worst time for them to go through that.
And so how's it going over this whole idea of keeping a phone out of a young person's hand until they turn 16?
Right, and we're saying to delay smartphones until at least 14, and it's just smartphones. It's not all phones. Obviously, some children do need phones at a young age, and that's fine. There are lots of phones that you can have for just talk and text, and there's even pinwheels available in Canada now. It looks like a smartphone. It has GPS on it, but the parents can control it from the parent portal, so you can add the contacts. You can have a lot of control over it, or as the child gets older, you can give them full control. But there's no social media or internet browser, so that's where it gets tricky, because these social media apps, they are so addictive. And one of the most concerning things for me is the amount of contacts that kids are adding, and many of them, they do not know them. You can add by just by GPS location or by common friends. With just a talk and text phone, you actually have to ask your friends for their phone number and, add them to your contacts, and that's fine. But kids are communicating with a lot of strangers.
Right. Okay. 14 years, not 16 years. My bad there. But even getting
or
to
as
14
long as
can
possible.
even getting to 14 can be quite a challenge, I think, for a lot of people. And we'll get into that, and maybe we'll hear some personal experiences from Maritimers as we go along. But Kelly, I just want to go back before we go to the phones and touch on really what you're sort of hoping in the future, which is that whole notion of the algorithms and algorithm reform and the government's responsibility on that front.
Right, and this movement came out. Western Europe has actually gone a fair bit, faster than us in this. Came out after Meta Corporation, the company that runs Facebook, Instagram, and all of those companies, was found culpable for having caused a genocide in Myanmar. They skimped on paying for local fact-checkers who knew the language. Algorithms steered people. Some folks started putting out targeted misinformation about a minority group, and the algorithm kept steering people to more and more extreme content. And ultimately it wound up with a massacre occurring. The fact is that we're seeing that more and more. That, a study was done here recently that found even if young men start to look for advice on weightlifting or other things that might be associated with traditional ideas of masculinity, very soon they start being referred to Andrew Tate, a misogynist who's currently under investigation in Romania for human trafficking, and speaks a lot about how you should treat women with violence and this sort of thing. Being steered towards more extreme content is something, and it's amazing. When I go buy my 2-year-old baby food, I can look at the label and know exactly what's in it. Companies do not have to disclose the algorithms they use and how they steer people to content and recommendations that keep in the idea of the company, keep their eyes glued to the screen for longer periods of time. Government should absolutely require that algorithms be not only public, but that there be some regulation and limits on, say, things like mandatory breaks, like trying to steer people, not steering people towards emotionally gripping or ideologically extreme content. And disclosure goes a long way, just for we're even mindful about what companies are doing, but some kind of regulation. And national governments can do this, especially if they collaborate.
And to go back to that hopeful tone that Jennifer mentioned, coming out of those voices of those young people in Halifax, where some of them were saying, I'm trying to cut back, or I want to cut back. Kelly, you kind of touched on it there again, but there seems also like there's a need for media literacy. There's a greater understanding required for how you're being manipulated or why you're being manipulated?
Absolutely. We train kids to read nutritional labels in health class, but this may be even more important because as your piece showed, this is becoming more and more something that speaks to people's ability to self-regulate their lives. Even some of the tips that are extremely important, I use them as adults. Something I did a while ago is just consciously unbundle where I centralize my life. I've started buying physical books more so that I can have some uninterrupted time. I've set times to socialize outside. I have I do use technology to stream my music, but I actually have something attached to my Bose speaker that I only use for music. The idea is to unbundle and use those strategies so we aren't simply saying, gosh, I should take a time out from interacting online and talk to people with my mouth. But everything I need to do is here on this device. Those are things that more and more we have. It is going to take a smart information consumer, one, to understand how we are being manipulated and to know how to resist, just as we would train our kids to understand the agenda of cigarette and alcohol companies. We need to think of technology as much the same. They want you hooked and addicted, and there need to be public good limitations on the pursuit of profit. Just because big companies in this case seem kind of cool and forward-thinking and wear black turtlenecks that are hip doesn't mean they aren't large companies that may have an agenda that is different than the public good.
Well, we're asking on the phone in today, what impacts do you think social media and smartphones are having on young people in your life? How do you deal with smartphones in your home? And what do you think of efforts to regulate smartphone usage in schools? 1-800-565-1940 is the number, and the email is marnoon@cbc.ca. Jenna Poste is on the line from Hammonds Plains in Nova Scotia. Hi, Jenna.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. And so I understand you are a parent of a couple of children?
Yeah, I've got a 6- and 7-year-old, so I'm kind of looking ahead and just trying to, see what I can do to start having these kind of conversations in my community, and my concern is around these devices and seeing just how it's changed childhood, for these kids for like the last 10 years. And, I think, as Jennifer was saying, we're all in this kind of collective trap of everyone's got one because everyone's got one. And I think we need the government to help us, similar to restrictions on smoking that came at one point for kids. It just feels like that's one of the only ways we can really, truly have a bigger impact, if we get support from government on regulations in schools and regulations on access, and trying to do that to address this.
And so your 6-year-old, is your 6-year-old asking for a phone? Is that front and center in that child's mind, or even your 7-year-old?
No, not yet. But honestly, we have very open conversations kind of about devices to try to help them understand, why these things are a little bit tricky for me. Like, there's a reason why, I'm trying to regulate my own usage, because I kind of use that language, like, sometimes this phone's tricky and it keeps wanting me to go back and look at it. So I'm trying to, set a better example for my kids. So, while they're not asking yet, I'm expecting that day is coming sooner than I'd like. And unfortunately, at the age, it just seems to get younger and younger. Kids are getting them, and that's concerning.
So it sounds like you'd like folks to kind of move in lockstep here then.
Yes.
It would be easier as a parent if not only everybody maybe on your street, but everybody at the school, for example, adopted
Absolutely
the same approach. I mean, how realistic is that?
I think it's not easy. I don't think any of this kind of change is easy, but I feel like if we had more people, like you said, stepping together and getting more people on board with this, then there's less kids who are going to have the phone, less kids feeling left out. And it is all about that FOMO. I heard it in the students you guys interviewed. They all want to be there because they feel like everyone else is, but if less and less kids have them, and there's less and less opportunities for them to use them, like at school or because of age restrictions, then there's going to be less of a desire for the kids to want to use them and want to be on there.
Mm-hmm. So you're concerned about, the mental health, the threat of addiction that the phone might bring. What about just their physical well-being as well? I mean, if they're on the phone, they're not outside playing.
Yeah, I mean, when I heard that statistic, one of the students said that she's on social media for like 62 hours a week. That's a lot of time that they could have been spending, doing a sport, getting outside. It's just, that to me is one of the most concerning things, is the addiction of these devices to keep them hooked, and it's taking away from their time and ability to go be in person with their friends and have a typical teenage life that I think we all grew up in.
Mm-hmm. What about your usage then? You say you are trying to regulate, at least in front of the children, I suppose, but you, like everybody else, I'm sure relies on that smartphone for all kinds of things, between anything from paying bills to booking kids' events to the whole gamut.
Yeah, I mean, I work in the tech industry, so it's absolutely a part of my life. But I just try, honestly, since I've started to educate myself more on this, I'm just trying to set a better example. So I keep it out of my bedroom at night. I plug it in the kitchen. I make sure I have limits on all my apps on my phone. I now try to leave it in the other room when my kids are home. And just, if I need to go check it, I go in the other room and check it. And then half the time it'll be an hour gone and I even forget I have it. Mm. Like, as soon as I get it off of my body, it's amazing how freeing it feels. So, and when I do need to use it in front of them, I try to tell them what I'm doing. So if I'm using it for a recipe to make dinner, I tell them that. Or if I'm saying I got to respond to a friend at work who needs my support right now really quick, then I just try to tell them, so that, I even am checking myself that I'm not the one doom scrolling on social media myself during those moments when I could be connecting with them.
Yeah. Jenna, thanks for the call.
Yeah. Thanks for the discussion. I was excited to hear this as a topic.
Yeah. Thanks for being a part of the program.
Thanks.
Jennifer, I just want to pick up on one of the things that Jenna said there, which is keep it out of the bedroom. You hear, and we heard it in the tape as well, of the students there, that you go to bed early with good intentions, but you're still scrolling at midnight. So that separation, there needs to be even a physical separation.
Oh, definitely. That's probably one of the most important tips to give parents who, when their children have smartphones, is to keep them out of the bedroom at night. And this gets even trickier because, like Kelly said, these devices are so many things and they're often your alarm clock. So kids might make that excuse. I need it for my alarm. And we do kind of have to go back and have so many different devices for the things that we need, our music, our alarm clock, and things like that. But I don't know if anyone's familiar with Jonathan Haidt, and he wrote The Anxious Generation, came out last year. And he talks about the 4 foundational harms, and sleep deprivation is definitely one of them, because it's very common for youth to sit up all hours of the night because they just can't put it down. It's designed to be addictive. I mean, iPhones themselves and then the apps they just keep them on there, doom scrolling. And I think parents would be really surprised to find out sometimes how very little sleep their kids are getting.
Yeah. Well, we're asking how you see social media and smartphones affecting young people in your life. 1-800-565-1940 is the number, and our email is marnoon@cbc.ca. Thanks to Jenna for kicking us off there with her call. You can do the same, and we hope you do. But while you get in touch, Cassie Williams has a quick look at news headlines. Hi, Cassie.
Hi, Bob. Well, the provincial government's Nova Scotia Loyal Voucher program for students is coming back this year, and it's expanding. It gives all public school students in Nova Scotia, as well as NSCC and university students and some other groups, a $10 voucher that can be redeemed at participating farmers markets. Also in the news, former PEI MLA Robert Mitchell has announced that he is seeking the leadership of the PEI Liberal Party. Mitchell was first elected to the Legislative Assembly in 2007. And we're waiting on the results from an ongoing judicial recount in one of the closest ridings of the recent federal election. The Liberal candidate in the Newfoundland riding of Terra Nova, the Peninsulas, won just by 12 votes. Now, all the votes have been recounted, and later today, lawyers will discuss some disputed ballots before the final tally is announced. And I'll have more news at 1 o'clock.
Thank you, Cassie. Young people's smartphone and social media usage. How are you dealing with these issues in your home? Jennifer Gill is with us. She leads the PEI chapter of Unplugged Canada. And Kelly Lamrock, also with us, New Brunswick's child and youth advocate. And Kelly, just before we went to the news headlines there, we were talking about, yes, keeping the phones out of the bedroom at night so that you get your full night's sleep, have it physically away from you to prevent you just dipping into it from time to time, or I should say repeatedly or for long periods of time. But to Jennifer's point as well, everything is on that phone. You need it for all kinds of reasons. So striking that balance is harder than what it maybe even seems like in theory. Would you agree with that?
Oh, it really does take a strategy. I think even adults find that, and children aren't born knowing these sorts of things. I can relate to where parents are at. I have 3 grown children and a 2-year-old, and I can tell you that, my grown kids probably came of age in the heady time when we all thought, technology will liberate us and it will spread democratic ideals across the globe. And my youngest daughter, Molly, is probably going to grow up with a dad who's much more, and a mom who's much more tech skeptic than we were 20 years ago. Unbundling so that our use is mindful rather than mindless. Even little things like watching television in a communal area or watching longer form programs. We're actually, I think the explosion of TikTok, and hey, I understand the TikTok or YouTube rabbit hole as much as anyone. But, we're not meant to exclusively, that's an all junk food diet. Society has problems that take more than 60 seconds to communicate. Ideas can take more than 60 seconds to communicate. I've been talking for more than 60 seconds. And more, we are starting to lose our collective capacity to reason and solve complex problems because we have wired our brains to demand instant gratification and short-term communication. And we're even seeing that in political polarization. If we disagree on things, usually we have to explain ourselves. If we only make short statements affirming what we believe and never discuss or debate, we're probably short-circuiting our own reasoning process. So all of these are things where we do need to consciously unbundle our services in our lives so that the devices we use mindfully rather than mindlessly.
I wonder to what degree, if there are teachers listening, they see that even in the homework assignments or the exercises that they hand out in class requiring somebody to write extensively on something to expand on a thought with a beginning, middle, and end. I'm wondering if, just to your point, the impact of TikTok, how that could be, there could be a direct correlation there.
Well, in fact, a number of studies out of Scandinavian countries are now starting to show a real decline in long-form critical thinking and problem-solving. I see it a couple of ways. One, I get called in a lot to help with high school debating teams. I remember in the 80s when I was a high school debater, it was expected, even the weakest speaker was expected to make an 8-minute speech explaining your side of a topic. Now the most common thing is children are struggling when I coach them to get more than 2 minutes, even the top ones. They're like, well, what? I've told you what I think. I've affirmed my conclusion. How do I break this down? And as a prof, I teach part-time at St. Thomas. In fact, next semester I'm teaching human rights and social media. And one thing is I am seeing more students who need a lot of help, personalized help with, okay, but I understand that's your conclusion. You've written 2 paragraphs, and they say, I don't know where else to go. What else do I need to say? And showing them how to set up a premise and a conclusion and a counter thesis and dealing with contrary arguments. It isn't just about pointing at slogans and saying, here's what I believe, or slapping on a red hat. But we have become a society that, as our problems get more complex globally, we are becoming stupider and more short-term in our communications, and it's hard to separate that from the media on which we now interact with each other.
All right, Sarah Spicer, you're calling from Berwick in Nova Scotia. First of all, thanks for being with us, and how are you managing social media and smartphones in your home?
It's been a tricky thing, and to be honest with you, we had a really hard time deciding whether or not to give our children a phone. I think you want to give that autonomy to them. You want to make sure that, they're safe when they're not in your presence. So, after school programs they're attending, you want to know where they are. You want them to be able to communicate with you. And because we're very lucky to live in Berwick, the kids have the opportunity to walk to school and stay for those after-school events. And but it took us a bit. We did a lot of research, and what we ended up deciding was we could do that. We'll start with one phone for the older kids.
So what's the age range for you then, Sarah?
13, 11, 6, and 4.
Okay.
So the younger kids don't use the phone. They don't have access to it. The older 2 do. What we did was we were able to use an app called Family Link, which is a fantastic app that gives me access to the phone, what their usage is. I can actually even time it so that they don't have internet access when they're in school, which, to be honest with you, since they brought in the policy of no cell phones in the classroom, this has been very, very helpful. And even teachers who I've spoken with have really enjoyed this no cell phone policy because it's the students are more engaging now in their lessons and with each other. But as far as protecting our children from what they see on the internet, one of your guests recently spoke, on the call, talked about having that access to TikTok and all those different platforms. Now, the difficulty is the AI and the algorithms that are set up are trained. They're learning as your child is looking at YouTube and TikTok and all of these other apps and platforms on social media. And how do you control that? Well, there are many options for parents, only have access to YouTube Kids for the younger ones. We can also restrict on those apps they're actually watching. We do not let our children have access to TikTok. That was a decision that we made, and I'm really, really glad. But yeah, there are things in place for parents, and I know you had a previous guest that had a 6-year-old, I believe, and she's worried about having the government step in and kind of give you restrictions on age limits for those kids. Every kid is in a different situation. Every child is different maturity level, but we're also very open with our kids. So we tell them, these are the risks. This is what can happen. Don't talk to strangers on the internet. Don't give your phone number out. We have a contact list that we've put in the phone. Those are your people. you don't add anything to it.
Yeah.
And if there's anything, right? So we really have talked to our kids about the risks. We've given them rules, and they're listening.
Jennifer, is that are those the kinds of pieces of advice that you also provide parents?
Definitely. I mean, those conversations are so important really early on, even conversations that you might think the kids are too young to hear. Mm-hmm. They are going to be exposed to things that you'd probably be shocked to know about. So you have to have those conversations, and definitely talking about strangers and things like that. But another thing to be aware of is sadly, there are a lot of predators that are using these social media apps, and they can actually do quite a bit of, digging. If there's any kind of digital footprint of your child, they can find out enough information to convince that child that, they might know them, that there's somebody they know. They can even take pictures from maybe like a friend of your child and create a fake account. Like these crazy things are happening. So
even Roblox. I mean, they go on Roblox and they're on a platform where you have children from all over the world playing, and they just need to ask you your name.
To what degree is that happening, though, Kelly? In your research, I mean, that does sound scary as all get out. Is it really more the norm, or is that an exception?
I think we are certainly the use of data mining and other things is something to be concerned about. There's no doubt that those who would exploit kids have gotten more high tech and have been able to create dangers on the internet. By the same token, one thing that is sometimes a great antidote to some of these online risks is saying, have we allowed some things that used to pull our children offline to atrophy? And I say that because, I even find myself guilty of this at work. It's like, well, if I turn my cell phone off for 2 hours, my office can't get a hold of me if something comes up. And I think, well, in 1984, every once in a while, I'm sure somebody who ran an office got in a car and drove to Moncton. And what did we do? We must have had some plan. I remember as a child, often being, knowing how to get a hold of my parents if I was home alone, I remember calling a restaurant once and describing my father to them. I'm not saying we should go back there, but to some degree we've become reliant on technology. We haven't always thought creatively about, well, what would we do if somebody just, for instance, was unreachable for an hour? Or, what did children do in 1986? Mm-hmm. We didn't have a spate of children suddenly disappearing or dying for lack of a phone. We got good at knowing which convenience store had a payphone.
Yeah.
These things all eventually we get good at. And indeed, one of the areas we are looking at here at the Advocate's Office is the move of right-to-play legislation. As we've gotten more online, we've also gotten far less tolerant of allowing children unsupervised exploration and risk, even though that is absolutely essential to problem-solving and good mental health as adults. For instance, when I was 8, I just came home, grabbed my hockey stick or baseball glove, depending on the season, and went to the court for 3 hours. Mm-hmm. Do we do that anymore? Or, in fact, would somebody be calling social services? Some places have started to push back a bit over in some cases, government bureaucracies that may over-supervise or over-regulate parents, allowing children between 6 and 12 to have reasonable ability to roam about and play outdoors. And these are things that we may have to think about. To some degree, we've allowed the old ways to atrophy, and now we're complaining we're completely reliant on the new ways. Maybe we need to be creative problem solvers about, well, if we don't have a phone with us 24 hours a day, there must have been ways we could deal with that without undue risk before.
Well, and I was going to ask Sarah if that's the context of that she places her conversations in with her kids, but I think we've lost Sarah, so we're going to move along to Halifax now. Robin Tizard is on the line. Hi, Robin.
Hello. It's a beautiful day.
It is a beautiful day. So how do you feel about the ubiquitous cell phone and the social media apps and the impact on young people?
I feel that the modern cell phone and that social media are one of the greatest inventions in our current human history. And as your caller, Kelly, or the guest Kelly there, keeps bringing up a lot of things from the past, I mean, we're evolving as human beings, and we have to use this technology to our advantage. And children, yes, we need to educate them how to use them. I'm 35 years old. I've grown up with technology from basically the inception of the cell phone to now. I use it in ways to learn things on YouTube, to communicate with people on social media who have different opinions than I do, so I can gather their opinion and create a better opinion of my own. I've learned how to make my own bike work. I've learned how to do construction at my house using social media. I've been able to interact with people. And I think those are the kind of things we need to focus on. Instead of fear-mongering social media, and every time we restrict something from young people, they want to rebel. So the more we restrict, we create that rebel, restrict, back and forth. What we need to do is we need to highlight just the positives of it.
Just the positives, though? I mean, so just to push back a little bit there, Robin, what about just both? Yes, there's a lot of good that comes with social media, but you don't do that at the expense of ignoring some of the negativity, do you?
No, but if you give energy to the negativity, I believe it's unnecessary. And then children can use that to blame it, say, oh, it's because I was on my cell phone all night. And we're giving them reasons to create negativity. Like, I truly believe that everything can be looked at in a positive light. And as soon as you shine a light on the negative aspect of it, then you give it power, you give it energy, and that is going to create a spiraling negative feedback loop. What we need to do is focus on the positives of it. And the parents who are calling, I'm not a parent, but when I do have kids, I'm going to let my kids go on social media as much as they want and do everything. But what I'm going to do before they go on social media is I'm going to establish passions and things that they're going to be into in their life, that they're going to want to go on social media and research those things using social media. A lot of people have used the word research today. Where are you researching? You're researching on the internet. You're researching using social media. You're not going to university and getting studies from a professor. You're literally researching online.
Yeah. Okay. Robin, thanks very much. To his point there, Jennifer, we used to use a stack of encyclopedias to look up stuff when we're at home. Nobody has those anymore. It's all on your phone. But to his point about how you frame the discussion and the fear that if you say no, you are going to end up just, having your young person rebel.
Yes, I do understand that, but the fact is there's actually so much data and evidence from the last 10 years on, the dangers and the harms. So they really do exist. Just one statistic is the average age kids are exposed to violent pornography is 11 years old. And that's just a study from, I think it was 2020. So there is a lot of explicit content on the internet. It's unfiltered. I mean, there are parental controls. Like I think the last caller mentioned using Family Link. But there are always backdoors to those as well. Like a lot of apps, even seemingly safe apps, have in-app browsers. So even like with those parental controls, you can have the Internet Explorer blocked, but they can still access the internet through these apps. And kids learn pretty quickly how to do that. And there is just a lot of harmful content on the internet. So I understand what he's saying about as soon as you restrict something, they're going to want to do it more. And hopefully someday the internet will be a safer place, but it's not safe right now for children.
What do you think, Kelly?
Teenagers rebel. Yeah, we know that. By the same token,
dangerous man who may be armed. RCMP responding. Area of Northfield Road, Lower Northfield, Lunenburg County, Nova Scotia. Residents, seek immediate shelter or stay inside and close and lock doors and windows. Do not leave a secure location. Suspect Richard McInnes last seen on foot. 6 feet, 175 pounds. Auburn hair. Green eyes. Nova Scotia RCMP is responding. Do not provide a ride to anyone asking for one. Do not pick up hitchhikers. Do not disclose police locations. Call 911 to report emergencies or tips. Updates will be posted to RCMPNS social media accounts.
Having companies have to disclose where they're steering them or what they're doing, what they're doing to keep them watching. Those, I think, give us more information and more things to do. So I agree with Robin in that, yes, I think you have to strike a balance. And there are many good things. I think it's wonderful, and my kids don't believe me, that when I was a teenager, I had to wait till the morning news to find out who won the hockey game. That's great. That's better. But I think information for the end user and disclosure for parents remain absolutely important. And I don't buy this learned helplessness that says, oh, well, if we give our children any negative information about something, they'll just do it more. People are a little more complex than that. As a teenager, I didn't blindly follow my parents. I also didn't blindly simply do the opposite of what they said either, and good parents find a way to balance that.
Okay, Robin, thanks again for the call. And Mary Ann Earl in Dartmouth adds, parents need to reinforce the children should alert them of any activity that doesn't seem right. They won't ever be in trouble, and they can help to protect other children by letting their parents know. Another thought to add here, as we get down to the last few minutes of the program, we're going to go back to the phones and back to Halifax. Fanny Whiteman is on the line. Hi, Fanny.
Hello there.
Hi, welcome. And what do you think of social media, cell phones, and the impact on young people?
I have, it is complex, and I really appreciate this conversation. I think it needs to happen a lot more. The young people know more than the old people about internet activities, social media, and how to get around all the barriers that adults put on. And parents don't know how to, because our generation generally wasn't raised in technology. And so, you know, it's wonderful when adults are able to have the know-how to put limitations in education for young people, but basically that's not the majority. And I'm an educator and a counselor and also a mother of two teenage children, and one is able to recognize when their their social media use is over, is too much, and the other one is being swallowed up by social media, and it's impacting their mental health to a degree that is it's almost like it's taking over their ability to problem solve and critical think, because they're validated through whatever their search is in their history or what, so AI is like really parenting our children. So I'm a proponent of loving social media in so many ways and educating young people so they can also help educate, they're always being asked how to use certain elements of technology and that, but it's a mutual problem. It's across. Our elderly don't know how to use it and are being lost and are begging for connection, and they can't because they don't know how to get through, use the technology. And then young people are being raised with it in their hands and screaming instead of saying, can I please go outside now? They're like begging to come in when they're put outside. And that's when I realized, like, wow, they're missing out. And they're this generation, we're considering them the hated generation. They consider themselves the hated generation and the lazy generation, which is untrue. They are just a product of our society. So when I look at Australia and their brave new ban on social media for anyone under 16, I think that's what we need, because we have not proven we can self-regulate. We have toxic materials out there and we still buy them. Mm-hmm. If it wasn't allowed, we wouldn't buy them.
But you say your older child is getting good at self-regulating.
Yeah, she was older. She was on the cusp of not having access to it. Like, she had a flip phone. And so I was able to really help her understand the importance of regulating her time. And I really believe, like your other caller, is that we support our children in making those decisions, but no is an important word. We need to teach our kids consent, and consent means a no is a perfectly good answer, and you can be upset with my no, but the no is for their greater good. And like your young people at the very start of this call, they were saying how, they're saying they see their problem. So assisting them with their goals to decrease their amount of time on social media so they can have better mental health. When we have anxiety is going through the roof, ADHD is seen as something that's not related to technology most of the time. And I believe it is very related, because the relationship between not being able to hold on to information and not being able to focus because we're so distracted with our addictive qualities of technology. It's like there's so many. I would love to do a test on someone with ADHD or a group of people with ADHD or even social skills deficits, and have them away from technology and see how things might change for them in their ability to cope and strategize around focus and paying attention, participating, and using real strategies, not just relying on the technology. And I'm, like I said, I love technology.
Right.
I use it regularly to learn. I mean, I just changed the oil on my truck because I could, had YouTube. And but I also think that we're not teaching kids how to use it to learn. We say you can use it to learn, but we're not teaching how to use that to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think that we, as a society, need to pull together to take some responsibility for our young people and help them be the next generation that they want to be, instead of the hated generation that are considered lazy. They are not.
Yeah.
They are depressed. They are suffering, and I don't give them a freedom. I think they need grit, and I want to support them in their grit. And, my daughter is one of them. She's suffering from the lack of follow-through, the lack of perseverance, and feeling like she's not good enough, and she's not, she's comparing herself to everyone. And I feel like I'm up against Goliath with social media.
Some of the pitfalls that many people express. Fanny, thanks very much for the call. Yeah. We are just about out of time. Kelly, before we go, in the documentation you've read, is there a correlation between ADHD and cell phone usage?
I don't know if I've seen it that specific. ADHD is a very particular condition that speaks to why something happens. Are we as a species getting more distracted, more short-term in our thinking, less open to long-form communication? Is social media changing the norm that way? Yes. ADHD is a particular deviation from the norm, that it is a separate thing and not part of that. But we are becoming, the norm is moving downward in terms of attention span, because we don't train our brains anymore collectively to do that.
All right. And Jennifer, with just the 30 seconds we have left or thereabouts, Fanny says in some cases you just have to say no, and that's explanation enough. How do you feel about that?
I agree with so many of the things she said, and I think it's just so important to use this time when our kids are young to teach them about it before we give them access. I don't think that happened. I know it didn't happen with my daughter, so that's why I'm trying to do it with our younger 3 children. And I think they are already looking at things with a different lens, because we're being open with them and we're telling them the things that are happening, and they'll be more responsible, I think.
All right. We have to go, but Jennifer, thanks very much for joining us today from Charlottetown.
Thanks for having me.
And Kelly, thanks for joining us from Fredericton.
Thanks as always, Bob.
Kelly Lamrock is New Brunswick's child and youth advocate, and Jennifer Gill leads the PEI chapter of Unplugged Canada.